This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to China Global Television Network. This is The World Today. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi, and these are your top stories. The UN, African Union and the EU condemn the military takeover in Burkina Faso, while some inside the country celebrate. The US puts more than 8,000 troops on alert for possible deployment to Europe over fears of a Russian military move on Ukraine. And a stampede at a stadium in Cameroon kills at least 8 people during an Africa Cup of Nations match. Well, let's get straight into our top story. UN Chief Antonio Guterres has strongly condemned developments in Burkina Faso, calling on leaders behind an attempted coup to lay down their weapons. The African Union and West African Regional Bloc have also expressed security concerns. The sentiments come as the military announced they had removed Burkina Faso's president, Roch Kabore, from office. The military cited Kabore's inability to unite the nation and fight jihadists. In that announcement, they went on to state that Kabore's government had been dissolved, the constitution suspended, and the country's borders closed.
After 2 days of confusion and fear in Burkina Faso's capital, Ouagadougou, the army made a broadcast.
The
MPSR has decided to take its responsibilities before history, the national and international community. This movement, which includes all sections of the army and security, has decided to end the post of President Kabore this January 24, 2022.
While some Burkinabes celebrated over the announcement, the broadcast has sparked fresh security concerns. President Kabore has not been seen since heavy gunfire erupted from several military camps on Sunday. The United Nations, the African Union, and West African Bloc ECOWAS are worried.
Secretary General is following developments in Burkina Faso with deep concern. He's particularly worried about the whereabouts and safety of President Roch-Marc Christian Kabore, as well as the worsening security situation following the coup carried out on January 23rd by sections of the armed forces. The United Nations reiterates its full commitment to the preservation of the constitutional order and reaffirms its support to the people of Burkina Faso in their efforts to find solutions to the multifaceted challenges facing the country.
The military says the takeover had been carried out without violence and that those detained were in a secure location.
The MPSR also reassures the partners and friends of Burkina Faso of our country's firm determination to continue to respect its international commitments, particularly in the area of human rights, and is committed to propose within a reasonable time frame, after consultation with the nation's active forces, a timetable for a return to a constitutional order accepted by all. Long live Burkina Faso. May God bless our nation.
Accepté de tous. Vive le Burkina Faso. Que Dieu bénisse notre nation.
The soldiers mutinying were said to be demanding more support in their fight against insurgents. Kabore had faced waves of protests in recent months, amid frustration over the killing of civilians and soldiers by militants linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIL. The military leaders have promised to propose a calendar for a return to constitutional order after consultations with stakeholders. Chamrono, CGTN.
Well, to discuss this further, we are now joined by Lucien Kambo-Malbe, a journalist in Burkina Faso. Lucien, there is still some uncertainty as to what is taking place at the moment. Can you give us an idea of what is happening in Ouagadougou right now and what is the latest from there?
Gunshots were heard during the first night of a patriotic movement for safeguard and restoration power in Sisen district in particular, talking about Ouagadougou. And in Ouagadougou yesterday night, people observed a curfew. For the moment, no reason has been given following these sorts. Today, some organizations announced gatherings at the place of a nation, as they did yesterday in support of a junta.
Well, we have heard that the UN is concerned about the safety and the whereabouts of the former president. Do we know where Roch Kabore is and what he's had to say about this military takeover?
At the time being, we do not have any information about Roch Kabore. Even the tweet posted yesterday was found by some to be from a foreign country, which means that it's another person who tweeted in his name. And at the time being, we do not have any information about President Kabore, and he did not give any information about himself. We do not have any information about him at the time being.
Well, now, the military unit that made the announcement that Kabore is no longer in power is known as the Patriotic Movement for Safeguard and Restoration, but it is not very well known outside Burkina Faso. What can you tell us about this group, or rather this unit, and their leader, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Henry Sandaogo?
It is true that the military unit is not very well known outside the country, and even inside the country. But what we can say, what can note is that yesterday during the statement, the Junta announced that the movement brings together all the components of a Burkinabe defense and security forces. And the Lieutenant Colonel Henry Sandaogo is 41 years old, which means in Burkina Faso that he is young. What we can say about him is that he is a former member of a presidential security regiment of former President Blaise Compaoré. He was also a commander of a 12 Commando Infantry Regiment in Waiguia. And after advanced training outside the country, back in Burkina Faso, Lieutenant Colonel Damimba was appointed commanding officer of a 30th Support Commander Regiment in Camp General Babassi in Ouagadougou. After the terrorism attack of Inata in November 2021, where more than 50 soldiers died, Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damimba was appointed commander of a 3rd military region, which covers Ouagadougou, Koudougou, Fada-Ngourma, and Manga. He is also a writer, and he is the author of the book West African Army and Terrorism: Uncertain Answers. He is from the promotion the 92nd of the Kadiego Military Britannic. He is from the 7th promotion AMGN, the 4th George Namwando Military Academy of Coup. Lieutenant Colonel Damimba is nicknamed Army because he is very strict on military issues. All this shows that he is not unknown as many think.
Well, thank you so much for that. Lucien Kambu Malbe, a journalist there, joining us from Burkina Faso. And as we heard from him, still no news on the safety or whereabouts of former President Roch Kabore. Now, meanwhile, mobile internet services have been disrupted in the country, and soldiers have also seized the state television headquarters. The French embassy issued a statement saying the situation remains uncertain and advised its citizens to remain indoors, especially at night. The unrest comes just a week after about 11 soldiers were arrested for allegedly plotting a coup. In the streets of Ouagadougou, the army's seizure of power has received support from some of Burkina Faso citizens.
I don't encourage coups, but I defend the interests of the nation and the people of Burkina Faso. I support the military, no matter what people say. We want peace in our country, and if this is the way we will have peace, then it doesn't bother me at all.
We have suffered too much in this country, so let's salute the action of the military, and we hope that they run this country well, because life is very hard here at the moment. All Burkinabs support the military, and we pray to God that our country will find peace and stability.
Well, staying with this story, let's now cross to our correspondent Nabil Rufai, who has been monitoring events from the Ghanaian capital of Accra. Nabil, of course, regional bodies have already started expressing concern over the situation in Burkina Faso. What has been the reaction, though, from regional bloc ECOWAS and the AU? We understand the AU Commission chairperson has been in Ghana. Has there been any comment on what is happening in Burkina Faso?
Well, Lindy, indeed, the regional bloc ECOWAS and the African Union have condemned the coup in Burkina Faso. You know, they are concerned about the threats of insecurity deepening in that part of the West African country. So the ECOWAS and African Union have actually held the military leaders responsible for the safety of President Kabore, who where he is at the moment is still unknown. And rightly, as you said, the AU Commission Chairperson Musa Faki Mahamat has been in Ghana. He was here on Monday. And well, what brought him to Ghana has to do with discussions on Mali. We understand that he's traveling to Mali today to discuss with the military junta on renegotiating the timeline to return the country back to a civilian government. But equally, he's also concerned about the recent happening in Burkina Faso, and both AU and ECOWAS are trying to see how best they'll be able to resolve the situation. For now, it's unclear if ECOWAS will hold an emergency summit to discuss the situation in Burkina Faso, as it was done in the case of Mali and then Guinea, where both countries were suspended from the regional bloc. But it's early days yet, and we are monitoring to see what the ECOWAS leaders would do next after the situation, after condemning the situation in Burkina Faso. Lindy.
Thank you so much, Nabil Rufai, joining us there from Accra, Ghana. Now let's bring you some analysis on these latest developments in Burkina Faso. We are joined via Zoom by Mutaru Mumini Mukhtar. He's also in Accra, Ghana, and is the Executive Director of the West Africa Center for Counter-Extremism. Thank you so much for joining us, Mutaru. Of course, we are looking at a very dramatic situation in Burkina Faso, but it is roughly the third or fourth such situation in West and Central Africa. Burkina Faso seems to be following in the steps of Mali, Guinea and Chad when it comes to military coups. Mutaru, tell us, what is your view on what is driving these coups? Are there any similarities in these situations?
Well, thank you very much. You know, our fears have been confirmed in terms of how many countries could fall to, military coups before the end of the year. And whilst this is a new year, we are increasingly worried about, the tendency for this to happen in any other West African country. In broader terms, we are looking at the issues in terms of common factors in these countries. We are looking at the common issues of the challenge in many of these places. The failure of states to contain the worsening insurgency, like we see in Mali, in Burkina Faso, has rendered the states weak and vulnerable to these kinds of security situations. Whilst Guinea in particular has remained less, affected by terrorism so far, it shares a very long border with Mali. If you look at the issues of terrorism, several reports in Mali, in Guinea, in Burkina Faso, paint a very negative picture for the region entirely. Right. If you look at these issues and you marry it with the incidences of corruption.
Mutaru, unfortunately, we are almost out of time, and we are going to have to leave it at that. But we do thank you so much for your contribution to this discussion. Mutari Mukhtar joining us there from Accra on some of the core reasons why these situations are taking place in West Africa. Now, finally, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian told a news conference on Tuesday that China will ensure the safety of its citizens in Burkina Faso. This after the military announced on Monday that it had ousted President Roch Kabore. Now, Zhao added that China has urged all sides to resolve disputes through dialogue in order to ensure stability and unity. The Chinese embassy in Burkina Faso issued a safety reminder on Monday after the army closed its borders and dissolved the government and the National Assembly. Well, that is where we leave it for this edition of The World Today. Join us again in just a moment as we continue with news from Africa in Africa Live.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
A military takeover in Burkina Faso. What is ailing the West African nation? In Cameroon, a stampede kills 6 people. What is the security plan for the rest of the AFCON tournament? And Libya's political roadmap committee gives a report saying it would take at least 9 months to prepare for a new election. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up in this program. Entertainment businesses reopen in Uganda after a 2-year lockdown. And in sports, Cameroon book a quarter-final spot after a narrow victory over the Minnows. Right, UN Chief Antonio Guterres has strongly condemned developments in Burkina Faso, calling on leaders behind an attempted coup to lay down their weapons. The African Union and the West Africa Regional Bloc have also expressed security concerns. These sentiments come as the military announced they had removed Burkina Faso's president, Roch Kabore, from office. The military then cited Kabore's inability to unite the nation and fight jihadists. The announcement on state television mentioned Kabore's government had been dissolved, the constitution suspended, and the country's borders closed.
After 2 days of confusion and fear in Burkina Faso's capital, Ouagadougou, the army made a broadcast.
The MPSR has decided to take its responsibilities before history, the national and international community. This movement, which includes all sections of the army and security, has decided to end the post of President Kabore this January 24, 2022.
While some Burkinabés celebrated over the announcement, the broadcast has sparked fresh security concerns. President Kabore has not been seen since heavy gunfire erupted from several military camps on Sunday. The United Nations, the African Union, and West African Bloc ECOWAS are worried.
Secretary General is following developments in Burkina Faso with deep concern. He's particularly worried about the whereabouts and safety of President Roch-Marc Christian Kabore, as well as the worsening security situation following the coup carried out on January 23rd by sections of the armed forces. The United Nations reiterates its full commitment to the preservation of the constitutional order and reaffirms its support to the people of Burkina Faso in their efforts to find solutions to the multifaceted challenges facing the country.
The military says the takeover had been carried out without violence and that those detained were in a secure location.
The MPSR also reassures the partners and friends of Burkina Faso of our country's firm determination to continue to respect its international commitments, particularly in the area of human rights, and is committed to propose within a reasonable time frame, after consultation with the nation's active forces, a timetable for a return to a constitutional order accepted by all. Long live Burkina Faso. May God bless our nation.
Accepté de tous. Vive le Burkina Faso. Que Dieu bénisse notre nation.
The soldiers mutinying was said to be demanding more support in their fight against insurgents. Kabore had faced waves of protests in recent months, amid frustration over the killing of civilians and soldiers by militants linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIL. The military leaders have promised to propose a calendar for a return to constitutional order after consultations with stakeholders. Chamwono, CGTN.
Well, let's go live now to Accra, Ghana, where we are once again joined by Mutaru Mumuni Mukhtar for some analysis on the situation in Burkina Faso. He is the Executive Director at the West Africa Center for Counter-Extremism. Welcome back to the program, Mutaru. Turning now to what has been announced over the past 24 hours. An announcement last night, in fact, stating that the military would be taking over the country. But it was an announcement that was made by a unit that we'd never really heard of before. It's known as the Patriotic Movement for Safeguard and Restoration. Just tell us, who is this unit essentially, and what has happened to the country's top military leadership, and of course, what do we expect to happen next?
Just as you clearly stated, this is a very largely unknown unit before, and these are not very senior officers in the military. And as it is with several other coups that have happened, they are usually from the very, middle-level junior officers. This is a unit that is there is very little known about this unit, and this officer has been very well trained within Africa and in Paris with significant experience in terms of dealing.
Unfortunately, it appears we have lost our analyst there, Mr. Mutaru Momoni Mokhtar, of course, talking about the military unit that has conducted this coup, and still at this point, very little known about this group. Meanwhile, though, political tensions have existed in Burkina Faso for months. Cham Gono takes a closer look at the reasons behind this and this latest attempted coup.
For months, protesters have taken to the streets of Burkina Faso. The call of demonstrators has remained the same, for President Roch-Marc Christian Kabore to resign. Calls for his resignation come due to what protesters see as a failure to stop the growing militant attacks in the country. Burkina Faso faces a security challenge of intercommunal conflict as well as jihadist attacks with groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIL operating in the country. But President Kabore is facing more than just a civilian-led opposition. Earlier this month, 8 soldiers were arrested for conspiring against the government. Authorities allege the soldiers were looking to destabilize institutions. Military camps and personnel have increasingly become a target in jihadist attacks. Kabore has made attempts to quiet calls for his resignation. The government has also repeatedly shut down mobile internet service following protests. In December, Kabore reshuffled both his cabinet and several military posts. This included replacing the then military chief and the resignation of his then Prime Minister Christophe Dabire. But this wasn't enough. Soldiers mutinying announced they have ousted the president, and they're now in charge of Burkina Faso. Cham Hono, CGTN.
All right, let's turn our attention now to news coming out of Cameroon. At least 8 people have died in a stampede, this according to a government statement. The incident happened at the Olembe Stadium in the capital Yaoundé ahead of the Africa Cup of Nations last 16 game between the hosts and Comoros. Officials from a nearby hospital confirmed that about 40 others had been injured. Witnesses say children were also caught up in the chaos. The stampede occurred when stadium stewards closed the gates and prohibited more people from entering the stadium. The continental soccer governing body, the Confederation of African Football, says it is currently investigating the situation.
Just now, there were 50 people. I saw nearly 50 people on the ground.
We arrived and we entered, and there was a barrier and there was a policeman. He said, "No, wait, you will enter after, as soon as halftime starts." My brothers, the Cameroonians, did not understand. There were people behind who said, "Push." I was among them, and when I saw that, I left to enter from the northwest. They stayed there, and that's when someone left to open the barrier, because the barrier closes on the outside. So someone pulled. They pushed like that. Some fell on top of others. There were even babies. What I saw at the moment was 7 dead.
Well, let's get you some more details now as to what really transpired at that stadium. We're joined by Njie Enau, the head of sports at Cameroon Radio. He's live with us via Zoom. Njie, thank you so much for your time. What more can you tell us about this stampede and especially how it's affected the mood of the tournament?
Well, first thing I have to mention here is that this stampede occurred 30 to 20 minutes to the start of the game. 1 hour before the fixture kicked off, we had about 8,000, 10,000 fans in the stadium, and we had a lot of supporters around the facility, but they were waiting for probably 10 minutes to the game before getting in. So we had a significant crowd at the south entrance into the stadium, which is like the largest, but the main entrance for supporters and police officers and stadium attendants were trying to ensure that these people were getting one after the other, but cognizant of the curfew that there is only 45,000 supporters can get into the stadium, and so fans became impatient and they started pushing in, and what happened is a few of them fell on the ground, and a couple of others worked on them, and immediately, like you did well to mention, we have 8 persons who've passed away, including a 6-year-old and a 14-year-old. There are 7 other persons who are severely injured who are currently being treated in hospitals across the country. And as you can imagine, I mean, it's dented the mood of the tournament. Cameroon, the host, played yesterday, but this morning all of the local channels are only talking about yesterday's events. No one, I mean, very few fans can remember that the national team won 2-1, and there are concerns over whether this tournament will continue. As we speak, I know that the local organizing committee is currently having a video call with CAF officials, and I'm pretty sure that there's a statement that will be released after that.
I'll certainly be looking forward to hearing that statement. And indeed, possibly a somber mood over the Burkina Faso camp too today. They're in Cameroon preparing for their Africa Cup of Nations quarterfinals. But how is the team likely to be affected by events back home, where a military coup has just taken place?
I mean, there are concerns over what's happening in Burkina Faso. I've not had the opportunity to talk to any of the players, but I've spoken to a couple of the fans here in Yaoundé, and they're really worried, and they have the impression that this could have, it could take a toll on the way the players set up. Remember that Burkina Faso struggled against Gabon, and to be able to worm their way through to the quarterfinals and get such news is definitely not reassuring. A lot of them really do not have their minds right now on football. I spoke to a few of them yesterday, and they were really just concerned with what is happening back home. They're not very certain what they are going to meet back when they return to Ouagadougou, to Bobo Dioulasso, and I can imagine that that's the same spirit within the team at the moment.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much for that. Njia Nyao joining us there from Cameroon via Zoom. You are watching Africa Live. Time now for a short break.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Many passengers in a boat that sank in the Democratic Republic of Congo a week ago remain unaccounted for. At least 50 people have now been confirmed dead, and another 200 have been rescued. Authorities in Mbandaka city say the overloaded boat that was traveling at night capsized in the Congo River last Sunday. CGTN's Chris Ochambringa visited Mbandaka and now reports.
A family in grief. Relatives of a woman who died in the boat accident are mourning her in the DRC's northwestern city of Mbandaka. The victim was a trader called Ruth Abisa. She boarded the boat at a village called Bobanga to sell foodstuff in Mbandaka city. But the boat capsized near Ipombo village and she drowned.
Our sister was a mother of 3 children. We are very sad about her death. None of the local officials has been here to condole with us since we buried her.
A team of search and rescue workers have been trying to find survivors of the accident, but they only recovered the wreckage of the boat on Sunday. According to reports from the provincial authorities, 50 people have been confirmed dead and several others have been rescued.
More than 200 people have been rescued from that accident. We also got some people who died. There was a child, a woman, and other people.
Many other passengers are still unaccounted for. It's just a week since the tragic accident, but the large wooden boats are back on the river. Boat accidents are very common in the DRC because many of the vessels are often overloaded with passengers and cargo like this one over here. The passengers know it's risky, but they have no alternative means of transport. Many in the DRC can only afford to travel by boat because flying is expensive and the country has a poor road network. Some family and friends of the accident victims are calling on the government to ensure the safety of boat passengers.
People are dying in those boats on a regular basis. I'm appealing to our leaders to enforce the navigation standards so that our people travel safely. All they care about is collecting money from boat owners.
It's still not clear how many passengers were on the boat. Earlier reports indicated there were more than 600 people, but an official in Mbandaka city disputed that figure and said the register with the exact number of passengers was destroyed in the accident. For many of these locals, traveling by boat is the only way they'll earn some money to feed their families, and so they'll continue taking the risk despite the accidents that have claimed many lives over the years. Chris Sochamringa, CGTN, Mbandaka, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Right, let's go to Libya now, where a group of presidential candidates are calling for elections after the postponement of polls scheduled for December last year. They held a Monday forum meeting in Tripoli following an initiative presented to the United Nations mission in Libya last Thursday, which aimed to overcome obstacles facing the political process. The failure to hold the country's first presidential poll as planned is a major blow to international efforts to end a decade of chaos. The postponement of the December 24 vote has created uncertainty over what might happen next in the peace process. Many are worried Libya could slide into a new round of violence after more than a year of relative calm. Now, after the election process collapsed, the parliament set up a political roadmap committee to look at what to do next. It presented its final report to Parliament on Monday, saying it would take at least 9 months to prepare for a new election to avoid fraud and ensure security. Well, for more on this, let's now bring in Majdi Mohammed El Nakwa, a reporter based in Libya. He joins us live via Zoom from Tripoli. Majdi, thank you so much for joining us. To begin with, tell us more about this report on the political roadmap committee.
The main work of the committee is to figure out a roadmap for what happens after the elections got postponed. What came up with was comprised of 25 members of both the State Council and the Parliament. So far, the proposed idea is to work on the actual constitution for in the next 9 months and vote for it in order to have an actual election that will be going forward and taking us out of the transition period. The Parliament proposed this to the Constituent Committee, which is elected in 2014, but so far there's a lot of disagreement between the factions about how the constitution process will be taken over and how it will actually carry on, despite the fact that all preparations for parliamentary and presidential elections have already been done in the past couple of months.
Yeah, indeed. And what has been the reaction to the suggestion that elections cannot take place within 9 months? And I ask this in the context of concerns that violence may rise up again.
Especially after the military display in Tripoli last December, there's a lot of fears, especially by the citizens, 2.5 million voters, expressing that a fear of violence might erupt in the capital, Tripoli. But so far, it's been relatively calm, actually.
Well, that's certainly very encouraging indeed. Thank you so much, Majdi Mohammed El Nakwa, joining us there from Tripoli in Libya. Let's turn to South Africa now, where the governing party's president, Cyril Ramaphosa, has undertaken to urgently address matters of immigration to ensure that anti-immigrant sentiment that has been rising in the country does not worsen. Ramaphosa was speaking after a 2-day meeting of the ANC's National Executive Committee. CGTN's Yoli Sanjamela has more.
Since the South African government announced late last year that it will not be renewing temporary permits of around 250,000 Zimbabweans working in the country when their visas expire, there's been growing anger directed at foreign nationals living here. Movements such as the one called Put South Africans First are fast gaining traction. The movement has become the first organized group to openly call for the immediate deportation of foreign nationals, especially those who are in the country without legal papers. Some opposition political parties have even gone to the extent of visiting restaurants, demanding to see how many foreign nationals they have in their employ versus locals. There are now growing concerns about a possible outbreak of xenophobic violence. As a result, the governing ANC's highest decision-making body, the National Executive Committee, has called for this to be arrested.
The ANC will need to lead the debate on immigration in order to ensure that it remains infused with principles of Pan-Africanism and is not overtaken by right-wing sentiments. Promoting legal migration is a central aspect of securing the peace and security of South Africa and the sub-region, and the ANC must act against the stoking of anti-African sentiment.
South Africa has a history of violence against foreign nationals, particularly those from the rest of the continent. In a wide-ranging speech after a two-day meeting of the ANC's National Executive Committee, the ANC president also made a frank admission that the governing party is deeply divided, and those divisions are a threat to the country's democratic gains.
Our movement is going through a period of decay and degeneration. The ANC has been able to extricate itself from similar situations in the past. It is important not to lower our guard against counter-revolution. The threat to our democratic gains is also a result of an era of loss of moral and ethical principles within the Congress movement. We need to show determination in addressing the toxic legacy of state capture that resulted in security institutions being weakened, misdirected, and hollowed out. Divisions and factions in the ANC are themselves becoming a threat to our democracy.
The ANC is due to hold its elective Congress in December, and divisions are expected to intensify as contestation for positions in the party gain momentum. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Zambia has welcomed a consignment of 400,000 vaccine doses donated by the Chinese government. The batch is part of a 1 million vaccine donation pledged by China. At hand to receive the donation, Zambia's Health Minister, Sylvia Masebo, said it will go a long way in aiding the fight against COVID-19 in the country. China has in the past donated anti-pandemic materials, medical equipment and vaccines to Zambia. The Chinese ambassador to Zambia says China will continue to unite and cooperate with Zambia in fighting the pandemic. The cumulative number of COVID-19 cases recorded in Zambia to date is more than 300,000.
In saying thank you to Your Excellence, I want to go back to thank him and his government for the so many good things that the People's Republic of China has done to the people of Zambia. In particular, in my Ministry of Health, this is a donation to express our solidarity as two countries.
Right now, both of our two governments, we have realized that a very powerful weapon to fight COVID is with the application of vaccines. China, we are one of the first countries to develop high-quality vaccines. And we are very pleased to see that our resources could be of great support to Zambia. Last year, we have already offered 100,000 doses of vaccine to this country, and they have been in application and well received.
Coming up in your business news, up next. Entertainment businesses reopen in Uganda after a 2-year lockdown. And South Africa's long-awaited spectrum auction hits another hurdle.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Right, we start your business news in Uganda, where the government has ended a curfew imposed almost 2 years ago to contain the spread of COVID-19. Bars, concerts and other public gatherings have now been allowed to fully operate again from January 24th, just 2 weeks after schools reopened to students for the first time since the start of the pandemic. They will, however, operate under full observance of the standard operating procedures, according to President Museveni, who announced the lifting of all pending COVID-19 restrictions in his address on New Year's Eve. Museveni reopened the economy with the exception of the motorbike taxi or boda industry, whose operations are still subject to review by the government's COVID-19 committee. Meanwhile, containment measures instituted by East African countries have cost the region a total of $3.4 billion in lost trade when the COVID-19 pandemic first hit in 2020. As CGTN's Daniel Kijo reports from Dar es Salaam, a draft report on the East African Community Trade and Investment for 2020 paints a picture of the extent of the economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the region.
Restricted movement and lost trade links between East African countries due to COVID-19 cost the region's economies dearly. A new East African Community draft report shows economic growth in the region dropped from an average of 5.4% in 2019 to 2.3% in 2020. Some economists say that the varying paths chosen by each of the region's 6 member states to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic were largely behind the slump.
We understand that it was a new case, so each country was trying to, build and design its own strategy on how to combat COVID-19. But our differences were huge to an extent that it affected how we trade each other, how we visit each other, and all aspects of life was affected.
Trade experts believe the report indicates just how interdependent the region's economies are. A summit of East African heads of state recently resolved that joint strategies were the best path to economic recovery and dealing with any new COVID-19 waves.
Travel within the region has been a big challenge for the cross-border traders and EAC citizens due to multiple testing at varying costs. To this, the Secretariat has developed an EAC pass, and the EAC pass will be able to make it easier for citizens to travel.
According to the report, total investment in the region declined by almost 50% in 2020. However, exports from the region were spared a decline, rising by around 3% in the same year. The African Development Bank predicts that the economies of East African countries will grow by an average of 4.9% this year. Now, how the bloc presents a united front in dealing with the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic may mean the difference between achieving this figure or not. While the effects of COVID-19 were far-reaching on the region's economies, the pandemic has had some positives. Experts say that it taught countries in the region to look inwards to grow their economies.
If you look at the gold production in Tanzania, percentage-wise, if it's 100%, then over 70% is being mined by artisan miners. So they contribute a lot. That was not the case back in the days.
While the worst effects of the COVID-19 pandemic may be over, less than 10% of East Africa's population is vaccinated against the disease. The speed of which authorities can get the region's citizens vaccinated will determine just how fast the region can return to a resemblance of normalcy. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Central banks in some of Africa's largest economies are likely to hold interest rates over the coming weeks to shore up their recoveries from COVID-19. That's according to analysts who say that despite high inflation and U.S. policy tightening, Africa's major central banks are set to prioritize supporting their fragile economies over taming price growth by leaving key interests unchanged, at least in the short term. According to experts, most of Africa's economies lack the resources to provide the level of fiscal stimulus which enabled the quicker recovery of developed markets. With this in mind, financial experts are cautioning countries on the continent against hiking rates too soon, saying leaving rates unchanged could allow the monetary policies of last year to filter through economies. Meanwhile, over in Zimbabwe, the central bank and business leaders have been exploring ways to halt the plunge of the local currency against the US dollar. According to state media, the central bank met with business leaders on Friday. It's reported that the main outcome of the meeting was an agreement to increase demand for local currency. All this in a bid to boost its value. The Zimbabwean dollar continues its plunge in value and has been one of the main drivers of its inflation, which reached an annual 61% in December. Economists watching developments say they expect the central bank to continue its aggressive monetary policy tightening in 2022. However, they're concerned it will not be enough to catch up with inflation, with some analysts forecasting the inflation rate to top 100% this year. Meanwhile, the CEO of Dangote Group, Aliko Dangote, and President of the African Development Bank, Akinwumi Adesina, are considering to collaborate so as to expand Dangote's oil venture to more African countries. According to Adesina, the project is well positioned to take advantage of the Free Trade Area Agreement. Nigeria's giant new Dangote oil refinery is to begin processing crude in the third quarter of this year. According to Dangote, mechanical work on the refinery is complete. The AFDB president went on to say that the plant was set to begin with a processing capacity of 540,000 barrels per day, with full production planned for either the end of this year or early 2023. South Africa's spectrum auction has been delayed yet again. The long-awaited auction was meant to take place in March this year after an invitation to apply was issued in December last year. However, Telkom approached the courts to stop the bidding from going ahead, arguing the process is flawed. Sumitra Naidu tells us more.
The issuing of spectrum has been delayed for over 15 years. The last auction was in 2005. Mobile companies have been desperately waiting for more spectrum in order to ease congestion. Despite the urgency, Telkom wants the process stopped and reviewed.
Telkom basically is upset or is not impressed with the way ICASA is managing the licensing of high demand spectrum for mobile broadband services. They have filed court papers again. This is not the first time they've done it, asking the two parts to its application. In part A, it's seeking an urgent interdict to stop the process. It has subsequently said that it may withdraw that application. It hasn't done so yet.
Negotiations are underway between the parties. Telkom withdrew part of its application to the courts on Friday, but it still wants the court to force the regulator to investigate further license options and the impacts of competition in the market, publish a draft invitation to apply for public comment, and issue a new final invitation.
The ITA cannot meet everyone's needs because every operator has different needs. So every time ICASA issues a new ITA, there are objections from one or other party. And that has held back the issuing of spectrum or even the holding of an auction to issue spectrum.
I think everyone who's party to this needs to move ahead with speed. It's taken far too long, far too many years for this licensing process to happen. The last time we licensed spectrum in South Africa was for 3G services about 15 or 16 years ago now. So we haven't even technically licensed 4G spectrum yet.
This objection means that the public will have to wait longer for better network service and contend with higher data costs for longer.
The consequence of having more spectrum is you roll out networks more efficiently. And if you can roll out networks more efficiently, then that reduces the cost. If you listen to the larger licensees, they have been explicit and they've been saying this for the last several years.
South Africa is one of the world's last countries to allocate spectrum, which has a direct impact on the country's economy. Increased spectrum will improve network availability, free up lines, minimize dropped calls, and provide stronger data connections, and most importantly, reduce data costs. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Coming up in your sports news up next. Cameroon book a quarter-final spot after a narrow victory over